Hello everyone and welcome back to another video here on my channel. Today we are going to be going over how to upgrade your lead sounds and in general just make bigger leads that sound better in your tracks. Now this is sort of a mini series I've been doing. We've already done how to upgrade your drums and how to upgrade your basses. I would recommend you go check those out as well. And this will hopefully be another good entry in that, and hopefully you do take away quite a lot from this video. As always, don't forget to drop a like if this helps you out and subscribe for more. As well as that, I do also have channel memberships enabled now. This is something new because I'm now a partner, and if you do enjoy my videos here and want to support me further, feel free to go ahead and join that, it would mean a lot. But I'm not going to take up any more time, let's go ahead and get right into the video here. So really quickly, I just put together a bass line and a lead melody. These are both on init patch, so it's just a saw wave. Right now this is going to sound pretty harsh, but I am going to play it just so you get a feel for what we're working with here. Just like a short little melody like this, and we're going to make, hopefully, this lead sound here sound pretty good. Now, context is important. We're not going to leave the bass how it is either, just because, you know, we don't want that to sound all simple like that when we have a pretty good lead in a bit. So I'm going to really quickly work on the bass and make it sound good. Because that's not the focus of this video, I'm just going to trim that out, and I'll cut back to when we've done that, and then we'll get to work on that lead. Okay, so we did a bit of work on the bass line, but as I did say, we have not worked on the lead at all because that's the focus of this video. So we're going to work on getting this sounding presentable and good. There's a couple of secrets that are kind of hidden in plain sight that I always use that make anything really just kind of work. So first off, before we do anything, you want to decide what of course you want your lead to sound like. And what I mean is at a basic level, do you hear like a saw wave? Do you hear a square? And just sort of as you sound design over time, you'll get a feel for what those sound like. In this track, I think I want a square. But it's not going to be just a normal square like right here when you leave it. We're going to do some effects to it and stuff. But right now that sounds like this. So in its current state, that's very harsh, but that's okay. That's something we're going to fix later. Right now though, I'm going to add some sync to it. You see I just hit this arrow on Serum. This is another thing that, like, as you sound design, you'll get a feel for what that would sound like and whether or not you want to go and add it to your track. In this instance, I know for sure I want some of it, because you'll hear exactly what it does. I'll turn on the sound and then we'll just go work on it. You could just hear how, like, that gets a different tone, and the more you change this, the more it's going to sound different. But of course, if you go too far, you know, there might be an instance where you want to sound like that, but not in this track. There's kind of a sweet spot that I'm trying to hit here. It's around here. See, that starts to sound really cool. It's a little different than a normal square, but you can still very clearly tell that's what it is. And that's sort of the basic premise that I'm going to start this sound with. Now, this might be something you could follow along with pretty easily, but now we're going to get into how to take like something basic like this and make it sound better. A lot of times I like to add a second oscillator and do something similar, but maybe like an octave up, and we'll give this one some stereo. So for example, it would sound like this. Dial it in. Still pretty basic, but we're getting there. Now we want to go over to the effects tab. This is kind of where we're going to make things shine in a much greater sense. So one of the things I really like to do a lot, just to give something some space, is add delay. Delay is incredibly underrated, I feel, because number one, it's tempo synced to your track, so everything you do is going to be rhythmic anyway, but it also just gives you a lot of stereo information that takes a basic sound like that and really just lets it shine. So to demonstrate what delay is doing, we're going to crank the mix all the way to max. We're not going to keep it like this, obviously, but just to demonstrate sort of what would happen here. You see how I hit play and it didn't happen right away? That's because that's the delayed signal. And this you could think of as like an EQ, because you're shaping what you want to let through. If I went all the way down here, you'd only have the lows. Don't know why you'd want that. But depending on the sound, I like to get just the mids, or sometimes mids and highs, like this. It really depends. We're going to listen to it in context so we can make a decision with that by lowering the mix down to about 50%. So this one, I don't like how it's getting the top of the sound, like the high end. I think it's a bit distracting. So we're going to pay attention to that and make a change. Do this. I think that's a lot cooler. And you could experiment with ping pong mode. Where it's like bouncing between left and right. But ultimately you don't want this too loud because it'll be distracting. But you see how this one thing has kind of filled in the empty gaps of our melody. So for example, like here, you see how there's no note here. But with the delay on, you're getting that hit of this first note again. It just fills up space. It's like you kind of used it as almost a reverb, and then of course you stack this with reverb after. And this kind of sound, you want a longer decay because it's a very big, bright lead, like this. Throw it a bit. Now, there's a couple of different things you could do with reverb to really help your sound go to the next level. One thing, and this isn't what we're going to do like for this sound, but very quickly I'm going to demo it for this. I like to do a really short decay reverb, and I'll show you exactly why. Listen to that. Here how the reverb is disappearing pretty quickly, but like it's very obviously putting that sound in a space. Especially if we get rid of the delay so you could just hear that reverb on its own. In a lot of lead sounds, that is the right call. It really depends. On this one, like I say, because it's going to be lasting a bit longer, we want to really fill out that space with a long decay. And up the size. Another thing that's really useful for lead sounds. This is going to be the multiband compressor. Now, this is the same as if you were to download OTT separate, because that is basically just what Serum's multiband compressor is. This is that OTT sound. Now, of course, I'm pretty cautious about throwing OTT on a lot of things, especially basses, but for lead sounds, I think it's totally okay, and I really like what it does to the sound. So if we listen to this here, we'll turn it off just to demo. And then with it on. Now, it's a bit quieter, so you might think, oh, that's worse, just because that's sometimes what the brain does. But we could up the gain after the fact just to kind of match them. So you see, that's made this a lot brighter, and I already thought the high end was kind of a problem with this lead, I just haven't fixed it yet. But you could actually click over here and adjust that, so you could reduce the highs after the fact. Another thing that's really cool is hyperdimension in Serum. Now, I tend to not use this too much, like in terms of like mix level, because too much of it can be pretty destructive to the sound, especially to your mono compatibility, I've noticed. But in moderation, this could be really cool. Also, worth mentioning just while we're here, effect order does matter. I try not to throw a multiband compressor like this after a delay or reverb, because if you do, see it's pulling it up, like the reverb tail. That is something I do intentionally quite a bit in other sounds, but in this one I feel like we're going to want that compressor at the beginning, so that way it's before any of the delay, before any chorus, things like that. Chorus is a great one to add, by the way. Same thing where I'm going to crank it to maximum just so you could hear what it does. And you could change between low pass and high pass for this. That's another one you definitely want to make sure is after your compressor if you're doing it, because I've noticed if you put it before it sounds really bad. I don't like doing that at all. Now, there's a couple other things we could do here in Serum Effects for some texture. A really good instance of that is usually a reverb filter. So if we leave the mix on 100%, we could demo what that sounds like as well. You just get like this weird tone, and then, you know, bring the mix knob back. You see, that's pretty interesting so far. I'm going to put all of our effects just next to each other so I could easily turn them on and off and remember what they are. But now, if we go back to kind of the beginning of this sound, it sounded like this. And we made a few changes here. We haven't even added any like post-processing outside of Serum Effects yet, and it now sounds like this. You see, suddenly that fits in a space, and it sounds quite nice, I think. There's a couple other things you could do in here. You could usually mess with some distortion. In this instance, I don't think that's what it wants. We're going to get into some post-processing to make this even better, because we're not done just yet. Number 1, EQ your leads to make sure they fit in the correct space. Now, everyone knows EQ, but it is really important to use, because this can solve a lot of your problems. So number 1, see, we've got a whole bunch of unnecessary lows, like down here. We don't really need a lot of those. We don't want to cut any of the important melody information, which you could see happening like over here. But all of those unnecessary lows down here, like below 100, those could go. Also, you could cut a whole bunch of highs without it actually negatively impacting your mix. Sure, if we went like this, you know, that's obviously way too dark and it would sound terrible. But genuinely, you could get away with doing something like this. Probably even a little more than that. And it sounds completely fine. It doesn't really sound like it's mixing it. If you were to take it off, you'd very clearly notice what that's doing. See, I can get away with even more like that. and it just chills out all of this area, which is really harsh. You don't need it. I think this is just a hair too dark, but make sure you do that because it allows a whole bunch of space for like later in your tracks when you add cymbals and like drums, stuff like that. And it means your lead and all those other elements are not going to be competing, and it just gives you a better mix, which in turn makes your lead sound better. Another thing I absolutely love doing is adding saturation. Now, there are free saturation plugins. I use FabFilter Saturn 2, which unfortunately is not free, but I love this plugin. And this basically allows you to multi-band add saturation to any part of the sound you want. So for example, we could grab the fundamental, which is like all over here, solo it, and we could add warm tape saturation, like this. I found this is incredibly desirable in a mix. You could also go up here, crunch this together if you want. You could also get rid of unnecessary lows that might add. Really lets you push it and just kind of heats up a sound is the best analogy I can come up with. Sounds like this now. Another great one that unfortunately isn't free, but I have to mention just because this plugin is amazing, is Soothe 2. Soothe 2 is a dynamic resonance suppressor. I've talked about it a lot on the channel, but basically this will in real time get rid of harsh frequencies from your sound. So I could demo what it would remove by pressing this delta button here. All of this that's like really sharp. You don't want to do too much of it, otherwise it'll sound bad, but in real time you see this has done this now. Now after adding things like Saturn, you might want to re-EQ, because it might introduce more of that low end that you just worked to remove, and I'm also noticing this sound is still a little bright, so I kind of want to do one of these. That's a good change. Something like that. You might find on a lot of my mixer tracks, I'm going to have a lot of instances of Pro Q3 after other effects, because sometimes they reintroduce some of those problem areas and you want to go re-correct the issue. Another really helpful thing to give your lead a lot of space is Dimension Expander. Now, Dimension Expander, you have to be careful because this does not actually affect your mono signal at all. So for example, if I went crazy and just upped the size and mix to max, hear how much space that's given it. It doesn't sound good because I've way overdone it, but if we go back to mono here, it's unchanged. So you have to keep that in mind when you're mixing, because you might make something huge with this, but if you're listening in mono, you're not going to hear any of that. I like to do something a little like this. Just a hint of it to give it even more stereo information, while still allowing you to sum it to mono, like so, and it still sounds good. Mono compatibility is very important to your lead sounds. You want to make sure they translate well in that regard. But now, you see, if we listen to this with our bass from before, lead's a bit quiet, turn up. And if I throw an EQ on the master here, you could see our high end is free. Like, we could add cymbals up here, whatever, and there's nothing to really clash with it, which is incredibly nice. But that's just a couple of tricks I do to make leads sound better. I hope this video has helped you out. I feel like I have enough to maybe make a part 2 to this, so let me know in the comments below if that's something you want to see. But that does wrap us up. Drop a like on this video if you did enjoy, and subscribe to stay up to date with more future content from me. As I mentioned as well, be sure to check out the Upgrade Your Bass and Upgrade Your Drums videos. I think those are really good, and you could definitely learn a lot from them. But thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.